Hi there, I'm Trevor Coote, and this is Business is Fucking Hard, the podcast where business owners pull back the curtain and talk about the realities of owning a business. We'll hear their stories, learn some lessons, and have some fun along the way. Thanks for joining us. On today's episode, we are joined by Alex Miller. Alex is co-founder and CEO of Big Block Construction, located in Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan. Alex has navigated his business journey focused on real estate and real estate development. His companies have challenged the traditional thinking and construction practices, which has not come without its own challenges for Alex and his businesses. I hope you enjoy this episode. Alex Miller, welcome to the podcast.
Trevor Coote, thank you very much for having me.
It is my pleasure. I say this every time. I'm excited to have this conversation. I genuinely am. I think people will hear that we've got quite a history, almost 20 years. And we went on different paths, but our lives keep intersecting. Yep. And I look forward to having the conversation about when we first met, because I think that's, I reflect on it once in a while, and that was a long time ago. So thanks for taking the time, Alex. Looking forward to hearing your story. As I do with everyone, let's get started with what was your introduction to business and entrepreneurship? How did you get started?
Yeah, great question. So I grew up on a farm, southern Saskatchewan. All right. And, so probably a typical farm kid. I learned how to work hard. And it was interesting because, my parents, my mom have had multiple jobs and still does actually, and they're well into their 70s. My dad farms and he's big into the cattle, which it's funny. He asked farmers like, grain farming is enough of a challenge. Then you add cattle, it never ends, right? Like at least sometimes with grain farming, you can take breaks throughout winter. But anyways, so definitely learned how to work hard, but I was allergic to a lot of stuff on the farm. So I, lived with my grandma in town, in the small town of Avonlea, for a couple different months throughout the year when it was bad harvest or, spring mold, things like that. So, so I knew that I wasn't going to be able to take on the family farm or anything like that. So it was interesting. I was good at math and science, and, you come from a small town and, I'm oversimplifying this, but it's like, you got 4 options in life, right? You stay farming, a teacher, an engineer, or something else. So I was like, well, okay, I'll go become an engineer. So, because I'm good at math and science, right? So I go into engineering and I'm there for a couple months, and I was like, what is this? This is not me. So I remember phoning my dad being like, what's happening here? Like this can't be for me. And he said, look, you're allergic to everything on the farm. And my dad lost his dad when he was 30 or 40. I can't remember, maybe early 30s. And so he just said, look, there's not really anything here for you. Go get an education and finish engineering, and then you'll figure out what you want to do. So unbelievable advice looking back 20 some years later, and put my head down and I learned how to learn. I learned how to get through something that maybe I wasn't overly passionate about. I learned how to solve problems. And so it was in my last semester of engineering where I'm like, all right, I guess I got to figure out what the hell I'm going to do in life, because I know it's not engineering. And so I read a whole bunch of books. I've never read books that I didn't have to before in my life. It's kind of sad to say. And I found that most people that had like freedom, financial freedom, had either businesses or real estate in their portfolio. And so I was actually in my last semester of engineering that I said, I'm going to make a business out of real estate. So that was how I kind of got into it.
And so inspired by books, I love the aspect of tenacity around the education, just to work through it, even though, you knew that might not be the exact direction. Inspired for the real estate side, what was that first introduction to, what could you see being your first move as it related to real estate after kind of reading?
Well, and to help maybe clarify, I don't know if I was like, I don't know if it came from books. It was more when the way I grew up, I saw my parents work so hard.
Yeah.
And didn't really have much from a financial perspective. We always had food on the table. We were always happy and full of joy, but we didn't have luxuries. We didn't have all those other items. And I just felt like they were a great lifestyle, right? Well, to some degree, I mean, you're always
Sure.
working, and so I think it was more driven out of a value of, it didn't seem fair to me that they worked so hard and yet couldn't take time off or didn't have some of the luxuries. I think maybe is what drove it. So that then books was an opportunity to try to unpack it more. But I was fortunate enough, like I finished my engineering and mechanical engineering, and I got a great job out in Calgary. But I had already planted the seed in my head of, okay, I'm going to get into real estate. I'm going to get into business. I don't know what that looks like. I'm also going to go down my career path currently, right? And so as I was, working through the great opportunity that I had in Calgary, I worked in the oil and gas industry for a year and a half. Great learning opportunity. But it was at the time where, like I said, the seed had already been planted, where I'm like, all right, I got to get into this game. And so, it was like most starts to business, probably a whole bunch of bouncing all over the place and trying to figure out what does a business in real estate look like. And so I think a lot of times it starts with some simple flips, trying to find an undervalued asset and adding value and then, seeing the monetary gain from the value that you were adding. But of course, there's so much more to it than that. But I think that's kind of how it started, with some initial flips, trying to understand what a business in real estate was all about.
And we'll get to the story in like 2 seconds around where yours and my paths first crossed. But was there stuff before that? Like, you had where were the flips in Calgary, and what did that? My biggest question always when we start talking about, the first moves in business was, how scared were you? What was the fear factor for you around stepping out on that ledge and making that first investment and pulling the trigger and saying, I guess this is the path I'm going to go down?
Yeah. Funny you should mention that, because actually I haven't thought about this, honestly, for a long time.
That's the fun part about this podcast.
You're bringing up stuff. I'm like, oh, damn.
Yeah.
I remember, so another guy that I had graduated engineering with, Tyler, we were good friends. We worked actually together at the same company. So, of course, I'm talking about how I want to do this, and very smart guy, and actually hilarious. We still work together this day. He was a business partner, still is in many aspects. It was a great guy. And we talked through a bunch of this, but then also one of my best buddies growing up, and he was one of the best men at my wedding, and he lived in Saskatchewan at the time. And so actually it was the three of us that started talking about this, and we all had this desire to do something more. And I actually remember we were sitting in a hot tub together, the three of us, kind of talking about it, and we kind of finalized it. And one of the ways I sold it to myself was, I'm like, oh well, and if I remember correctly, it was we'd started doing some stuff in 2005, but we wanted to like do it full time in 2006. And the way to maybe do it full time, to commit, is to kind of quit your job. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, oh well, I'm not married yet, and I don't have the kids yet. I'm like, oh, what a great opportunity. And I remember thinking to myself, I can tell my future wife, I'm like, hey, you married someone, didn't have a job. So I was looking at that going, anyways, back then I feel like it was easier. I had a lot more risk because I was willing to, you didn't have the same commitments. To me, I think what's honorable and much harder to probably accomplish is starting a business later in life, once you've got some of those commitments, or you've maybe been, beaten down with fear more. So I don't know, I guess I'm grateful enough that I did it when I was more ignorant. Definitely have some more pains throughout life than I think through the business, because you are more ignorant, but at least starting might have been easier.
Yeah, and that tracks with what I hear from people. Like it's the risk tolerance obviously is related to how much you have to lose, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot less in your scenario when you're younger and before family, all of that kind of stuff. But also it comes, I think some of it tracks back to what you were saying about your parents and kind of that work ethic and working so hard is when you do that earlier on, you get the benefit of the lessons that you learned by, that tenacity, that hard work ethic early. And then it becomes, and I'll use air quotes, it becomes easier later on in business because you've learned all the lessons through the hard work. It seems like you're working hard and you're spinning your wheels, but then later on you get the benefit of all of that, right?
Yeah, well, and I mean, you try not to make the same mistake over. What did they say? Fail just stands for first attempt in learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, looking back, you go, "Oh, that was a fascinating situation." But in the time, it's a very painful process. So, anyways, it's the kind of the joys of entrepreneurship and being in that seat. Lots of benefits, but also lots of opportunities for pain as well.
Yeah. And we'll get into that. I had a previous guest and I thought this was brilliant. Every, let's call it lesson, every mistake that turned into, a learning opportunity, they put it in their books as tuition.
Oh yeah.
And I thought that was brilliant because then it really hits home. Like that was, we're not identifying it as a mistake. It was a learning opportunity. Right?
Yeah. And I've also heard recently in a coaching program, you're either on the winning team or you're on the learning team.
Right. I love that too. Yeah. All of these. So great.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah. I've been on both teams many times.
Yeah. And we'll get into that. Cause I know your path has been winding and I love it. So you're sitting in the hot tub, you decide with your couple of buddies, this is what we're going to do. What did that first step out look like? Like, was it identify the property and just jump in, or was it a year of kind of business case, building things and then stepping out on the ledge?
Yeah, no, I think for us, we had actually started in 2005. And then we kind of made the formal decision to go full time like a year later. So yeah, we just jumped in, and we had lots of different, I guess, opportunities kind of present themselves. I remember, I moved in. I was living in Calgary. I bought my first house within 3 months of living in Calgary, and then I actually bought my first, flip within 6 months. So it started pretty quick.
Yeah.
But then it was more just the three of us all kind of aligned on how can we help each other more in the full time and less just kind of sporadic. And I mean, yeah, but we did both. We jumped right in to opportunities that we saw. But we also spent time on, creating a business plan. I look back now, I remember we were struggling on some of that business plan, and I just laugh at how ignorant we were. And yes, so in one sense, it's great you're hiring someone to help you, but at the same time, if you're so ignorant that you don't even know, and if actually they're potentially not everyone's created equal with their experience. And so it was almost like the blind leading the blind. And I look back and I'm like, yeah, there wasn't a lot of value that came out of that, except for, again, the ability to learn, and that it is important. And at some point, you're going to have to know that stuff. Today, you don't, but you will need it.
Yeah. It's one thing to bring in people to do something. It's another, and I'm sure what will come up later on is kind of this idea of mentorship and when to strategically bring in people to kind of give some of that guidance based on experience, not just based on their ability to do a project or to help you with a business plan, but to guide, right? Yeah.
And I mean, and one of the biggest things that I've used now for years is, if you don't know where you're going, all roads will take you there. Yeah. And sometimes at the start, if you're just trying and you're not thinking, you don't quite have the understanding of what business even is. Like, we jumped into it because we thought we could do it. Had no idea what business is. Like, understanding what is value. Like, what is the point of a business? People are like, it's to make money. It's like, well, actually, no. I think, in my opinion, the point of a business is to solve a problem. And if you can solve a problem, if there's enough value in that, and there's enough of a market and 1,000 other different factors, if you can actually make enough revenue to cover your costs of delivering that and you get a profit, that then is kind of the definition of business. It's offering a value to a problem economically. And I mean, I bet you it took 10 years to truly kind of understand that concept of what is business. And especially in the real estate, a lot of the things that we do, they're very project based. So you're starting and stopping every time, starting and stopping. Everything has a start and an end. You don't typically have customers that repeat. Different type of a business model. It's a project based business model.
Yeah, and so all of that is fascinating. Your comment about all roads, if you don't know where you're going, all roads lead to what? Oh, geez, I just
if you don't know
butchered
where
it.
you're going, all roads will lead you there. And I think it might have been
All
Mark
roads
Twain
will
or
lead you
someone
there.
who said it. And I find myself a lot of times going, right. So now a lot of times when we're getting into something, I'll just stop and be like, what is our desired outcome?
Yeah.
What does success look like? And if we can't answer that, we're not going any further.
Right.
Because the other thing that I use a lot when I give presentations or with the team, my mentoring is, and I love it, was the Albert Einstein quote where if I had 60 minutes to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes defining what the problem is.
Right.
And so if we get caught up in something and we're pulling in different directions, I just stop and go, okay, like where are we going? What does success look like? Because if we don't know where we're going, then of course all roads are going to take you there. I think that's one of the biggest things over the years. And the bigger you get, or the more people, or the more you take on, the more fragmented it becomes. And there's a huge similarity between that and the specific in the business of like real estate, which I think is why we have a real estate shortage, because everything matters, instead of coming back and saying what matters the most. But that's a whole separate topic, and maybe save that for a later date.
Yeah, no, I completely 100% agree with all of that. I think we run into it so often with the changing landscape that's around us, right? And it's moving so fast with technology and regulation and policy, and governments are trying to keep up. Every level of government is trying to keep up with the changing expectations of consumers, but the impacts of economic challenges, pandemics, all of it. And so at the end of the day, everybody's making decisions and nobody's asking, what problem are we trying to solve? Right? Like we're just trying to get to this end state that we don't know what it is, but like, what is it? What problem are we trying to solve with this particular decision? And I think as we unpack your story, you're starting to, like, you didn't just look at real estate, you looked at real estate in a different lens. So we'll get there. I think we're at the point where yours and my paths cross, and I'm gonna set the stage for that a little bit. I was a broker, realtor in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, with the Century 21 office, and which I owned with my wife. And I was representing a developer there, a great guy, and you were looking at buying a couple of townhomes in that development on spec. That would have been after a couple of your flips. I don't remember if you had partners in that deal. I can't picture the transaction itself, but where was that in kind of the continuum, and was that a launch point to kind of continuing on?
Yeah, I would say that was just another, I wouldn't say that was overly strategic. We did have partners, like the partners I had talked about, started it, but we also had some finance partners. And you know what, again, it's all about adding value. And I think there was a lot of times where we got off track and did projects that didn't add value. And then you pay for that afterwards. So in your particular example, like if you buy an undervalued asset and put work into it, again, more value than the costs, there should be some monetary gain that then benefits and, they appreciate the work you've accomplished. In this particular case, if you're buying something on spec, it very much is that it's a speculative nature. It's not what value are you offering? And so we did a handful of different transactions in the earlier years, some great, some not so much. And it was, I think, kind of part of the learning. One of the, I think one of the most unique and biggest opportunity that we had that kind of launched where we went is actually kind of interesting. It was, I remember we were looking for a mentor is actually how it went. We were doing a bunch of these different things, and it was like, like we need someone to help us. And so we started searching, like, who were some mentors in Saskatoon, or who were some real estate gurus. And anyways, we came across this gentleman in Saskatchewan, and somehow we noticed he was one of the mentors under the Rajmanik program. I think it was actually Canox, and we saw that they were having a business mixer in a month, and so we went out there and we met with him, and it was really interesting. He at the time said, "You know what? I love what you guys are doing, and hey, you're Saskatchewan, born and raised, awesome, good guys." But he said, I just took on a mentor by the name of Carl Miller, and really sad story. He, his wife, and his 2 kids actually, it was a head-on collision just over a year ago, and the entire family was killed. So it was super sad. But at the time, that's who he was talking about. And he said, I just took on this young mentor, so I don't have the time for you. But there's another individual. And so anyways, and we went and we met with that new individual, and he said, I have this potential opportunity. A whole bunch of units, they're up by the airport. They had just been renovated under a government program. You're going to have to find a way to physically pick them up, move them across town, put them back together. But if you can pull it off, yeah, I'd be happy to be a partner and a mentor of yours. And easier said than done, but 6 months later, we put all the plans and everything together, and sure enough, we ended up pulling off that project. And that was kind of how we got into doing larger multifamily. And when you think about, the buildings were built back in the 50s, they had been renovated under a government program, so it made sense that you could pick them up and you can move them across the city. But it was like, that doesn't exist in every neighborhood. It's not like you can go find these buildings. And that's actually where we stumbled upon modular construction. We stumbled upon, wait a minute, why are we building the same archaic way that we have for hundreds and hundreds of years? Isn't there a more efficient way of building? So that was actually how the initial seed got planted for all the advanced construction that we now do in all of our projects.
So we're going to go there next. I just want to reflect on a couple of things that you said in that piece of the story. The first piece being that I was not a linchpin in the launch of your career or your next success. So let's just be clear about that. I had nothing to do with.
That's not true. That's not true. You know what? Someone said once, it's like a pinball machine. You got to keep going forward. You got to hit the sides. You got to hit you were a part of the journey, Trevor.
Yeah.
Mistake.
Thanks, Alex. But I think the other piece, like I'm dwelling on your kind of differentiation, intended or otherwise. You didn't articulate it, but your definition around business: identify a problem, create value to solve the problem, and if there's a market for it, then you have a business, right? It starts with problem and then value, and value is kind of your North Star, right? Like where are we continuing to add value?
Yeah.
And then looking at it from that speculative townhouse purchase, you didn't see all of those things come into play. And so that really then just becomes an investment.
Yeah.
Right.
And it did. And you know what? I can't remember exactly. I mean, one of them might have added value because it was at the right price for a certain period of time, but it was more, They were just investments. They weren't really value add. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, I like all of that. Like, you can start to differentiate, because the other thing that comes up in the podcast a lot, whether it's said outright or using different words, is this idea of purpose before profit, right? Yeah. You're trying to do something first as a business, and then and the profit obviously becomes a major aspect and factor in the decision making and all of that kind of thing. But really, the business is there for purpose first and foremost. And
it's fascinating. I can tell you that we didn't really have clear purpose, and I wouldn't say it's because I would actually say that we probably didn't understand or recognize the need for how valuable it was. And maybe we might have intuitively acted in a certain way around a purpose, but we clarified it about 4 years ago. And building communities at full throttle is the purpose that we live. And it's I'm pretty loose with words. Those words, there's so much in that. But exactly to your point, purpose is so powerful.
Yeah. And I hear that a lot too, is that it almost becomes malleable with the business. Like, it's not a fixed purpose from the starting point to the end point. it's like it can change, and it can be like the guiding light that you're using as a purpose can evolve over time with the business. And I think you've, I mean, already identifying that you don't know that you had one to begin with, and now you've, like, it's extremely articulated. So let's get into that. Let's get into that transition. You laid the story out really well. It was not an intentional move, but it kind of evolved with this first project to get on a mentor or engage a mentor. You moved a bunch of buildings, and now what was the catalyst to start looking at more of that modular construction, and what brought you to Big Block?
Yeah, exactly. So at this point now, the opportunity had arose that, and you know what, I loved, so originally from a small town, from a farm around a small town, went to Saskatoon of 250,000, 300,000, whatever it was at the time, said, I want to move to something bigger, got that job in Calgary. And once this opportunity came in Saskatoon where we moved some buildings, I was like, and by this time I had been married, I got married and my firstborn, I was like, my wife's family is originally from Saskatoon, and I'm really focused on the business. It's probably a good opportunity to come home. She will have a good support group, and I could be, kind of a bigger fish in a smaller sea. So it was, kind of thought through I thought this was a strategic move to do. So I moved back to Saskatoon. There was 2 of us in Saskatoon and one in Calgary at the time. But the focus was on this project. I think we did an exceptional job on it. My focus was on the construction side of it. And that's where kind of this, like I said, the seeds have been planted around now, like the modular side of it. How can we, and my business partner at the time, actually, he was more focused on the finance side. So he was more on the financing, the sales and the equity. And it was interesting because we really started to see a need for helping the affordable housing sector. There's huge gap on the affordable housing sector at that time. Still is, yeah. And now I can articulate it a little bit better, saying, if you look at the entire housing spectrum, affordable housing is one piece of it. And when you classify it, you can actually say about roughly 5% of all the housing is affordable housing. But make no mistake, what actually matters amongst everything is housing affordability. Housing affordability affects all, including affordable housing. But anyways, there was a mandate in Saskatoon to say, hey, we need to build a lot more affordable housing. And so actually, my business partner really focused on that, and it was neat. Again, this is how purpose kind of defined. I was very much all about, we need to advance construction methods. We need to, like, it's archaic. Like, let's be more productive. Let's bring things indoors. Let's be efficient, and let's help our economy succeed. But we started doing a lot of the affordable housing projects. And then once I started to see the impact that it had on people's lives and our community, on how much, that's really where that purpose then continued to grow. I would say the purpose, prior to that would have been maybe advancing construction methods. But once we really started getting into the affordable housing space, and then as it evolved to big block construction and doing modular and helping a lot of different customers, some that I'm super excited and proud to share about their journeys, a lot of these amazing community organizations that need a partner in the housing space, that is where a huge gap got filled, and the purpose was kind of completed as to building communities at full throttle. Like we build for developers and investors. We also build for a lot of operators, nonprofit, indigenous groups, and the stories that they have, usually they're just so much more, I would say, impactful or more, I don't want to say meaningful maybe, because obviously investors and developers, you're still hitting a niche that's extremely important. But it's such a powerful story, and that really touches the heart. So I think it wasn't until we had a few of those projects that we had developed and seen firsthand the impact and the meaning that it gave, that really helped define our purpose.
And so those early days, Alex, of kind of moving into that modular space, you identify the affordable housing piece. Were you a construction company at that point? Were you actually building units, or were you putting the pieces together to have affordable housing built in Saskatoon?
Yeah, more the putting the pieces together. Like, so we moved a bunch of the buildings that had been renovated, but when you think about it, we still had to take certain pieces apart and bring in the right contractors and have our own crew, move them across the city, put foundations and site servicing, and at a time when the market was booming, so we actually had to create our own servicing company. You know, in the first 3 or 4 years, we had over 100 employees. Like, just crazy when I look back to like, what were you thinking? Like, if you're an expert at everything, you probably know nothing. Amazing opportunity. So we were for sure a construction company, but we weren't building the units. And then when we got into that modular side of it, I toured a bunch of facilities that build modular homes. And it was interesting because back then, and actually a lot of that still exists today, the modular plants that are out there, they've been around for 50 years. And they are amazing at building boxes, but they're actually more for, remote regions or rural regions, single family, more farm homes. Multifamily and modular didn't exist. And actually, I would still bet that the vast majority of multifamily and modular multifamily projects still don't exist. We have the most experience in Canada. We've learned a lot of pain throughout the early days. But what we really did at that start is we saw an opportunity going, wait a minute, this is an advanced way of building. Multifamily needs built, affordable multifamily needs built. How do we connect the dots? And it took us years to work with the modular manufacturer. And now we've expanded to multiple manufacturers and teaching them how to get into the multifamily side of it. Because building single family, and more single family or remote homes versus now a multifamily is a very, very different beast. And so that's probably where we spent, I'd say, 3 or 4 years really perfecting how to get into the multifamily space.
And what timeline are we talking about here? Like the early 2010s?
Yeah, I would say 2009 to 2012 or 2013 is when we're really starting to hone in the multifamily, the modular side of it. Yeah.
I want to go back to your comment about the scaling, because I think this is, again, if we're trying to pull out business lessons for the listener and kind of use these stories as opportunities to not only learn, but to identify with other people's journeys as well. That rapid growth, what did that look like? Where did things go right? Where did things go wrong? And what was the correction, if there was one, kind of at the end of that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was. Well, so if you think about this, all right, so challenging some dates here. I think I started the business with the guys in 2000 when I was 23, and fast forward. So like I maybe have 2 young children. I'm 27 or 28. And next thing you know, we're up to over 100 employees. And I have one other business partner. We're both equal partners. There's nobody overseeing us. You got a couple 27, 28-year-old kids running 100 people. That's a recipe for disaster. Now, thankfully, it wasn't actually as much of a disaster as it probably could have been. But it was neat because as we were building, we were able to bring to the market a niche housing opportunity for a lot of people that needed it. And we could deliver it fast. So the sales got to a point where the sales just kept going. So it was my job just to kind of keep up.
Right.
It was on the operation side, right? And so it got to a point where it became really, really efficient. And then fast forward how many years, all of a sudden the sales maybe weren't there. But, we're both partners. There's no one over top looking at this. We're still in our late 20s. No one's saying, hey, guys, typical housing industry has ebbs and flows.
Yeah. Operations
should never go ahead of sales. Like, what do you, but naive, young, dumb, and just keep going. And never could I fathom that things would slow down. Why? I mean, we just kept building. I think I remember being called a doozer at the time, right? Or was that a dozer? Or remember those, like a Fraggle Rock or something? You just keep going, keep building. It was like, I don't know if that's an endearing comment, but anyways, building, right?
It's a throwback.
Yeah. And anyways, and so didn't really have my head wrapped around the market side of it. And when things started to slow down, we actually built some rentals, which kind of helped fill that gap. But ultimately, oil crashed in 2014. It then took a few years, but it really did start to hit residential market in about 2016, 17, 18. And for those who made decisions quickly in 2016-ish, it was okay. We hung on. And we didn't mean to. We weren't trying. It's not like we were just young and more ignorant, saying, well, I don't know if this is really affecting us, is it? And so there was some pain throughout 2016 and 17, but really in 2018 is where the pain hit, because now, some of the finance partners basically were like, look, you're overbuilt in Saskatoon. I'm not going to approve another project. And so, no. And it was like, at that point we had gone from, being profitable a few years prior to kind of barely breaking even to now you can't even build a project. Well, if you can't build a project and you're a project-based business,
right?
Where's the long-term success of the business? So
right.
That was for sure one of the most painful things we had to go through. It was a restructuring. And again, it was like, how are we going to add value and what are we going to do, and kind of restarting, if you will. But again, what a great opportunity to kind of, to restart under a new set of lens and a new value. And you're not restarting without knowledge. You're restarting with an amazing amount of knowledge. So yeah, anyways, I'll stop there. But
And was it, I should know the answer to this, but at what point did you become Big Block Construction? Was it during that transition or was it before that?
Yeah, exactly. Prior to that, we were kind of like a developer and a construction company all in one. And then what we did is the business partner and I, we both decided, okay, we still owned a bunch of rentals together, great relationship, and we're happy with that. But we said, okay, we kind of have a couple different paths forward. And it was at that point where brought on a handful of the team, and we started to build Big Block Construction, where we weren't a developer, more of a design build general contractor, more of a development partner for a lot of the nonprofit groups. Really wanted to help others, because really when you think about it, we did not have an unlimited supply of land or an unlimited supply of capital or an unlimited supply of a market. We knew how to build really, really well. We knew how to design, build, modular construction. We could scale that. And so the business model with Big Block Construction is, as a design build partner, as a design build general contractor, we can help groups that have land, that have need, that have access to funding. And so that's really where we took the opportunity to, I guess, reset our own expectations and know where we're going. And then, yeah, it's been an awesome, really, really awesome 5 years since.
And how many staff do you have now?
Just under 30.
Yeah. So what, that transition from 100 plus to under 30, was it kind of in that 2018 timeline, was it kind of overnight, or was it a slow drop and then a slow increase kind of thing?
It came in different waves. So, we kind of started with only a few, ramped up to over 100 within a few short years. I think that was about 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And then we started to refine some processes. And by about 2014 or 2015, I think we had got down to about 40 really, really, really solid, efficient, trained, awesome people. And then that's why, to me, 2018 was for sure one of the most painful things I ever went through. And it was because at the time, looking back now, it makes a lot of sense. We readjusted. We found our new North Star. We found a way to survive and thrive. But at the time, that's not what it looks like.
Right.
The world's coming to an end. You're laying people off. You don't know how this is going to work. You're looking, am I going to be bankrupt? We made decisions way too late. You think it's the end of the world. You think people are going to go homeless. You think people are not going to get their feet underneath them. And horrible, painful experience that I don't wish on anyone. Horrible, painful. At the same time, I'm so grateful I went through it. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't use that as part of my North Star to make sure that I'm protecting our team, ensuring that we add value, ensuring, financial due diligence in our organization going forward, because I don't want to repeat that. Like that was a trauma that that to me has kind of given us some guiding principles.
I think anybody can probably do a top guess or a top 3 guesses of what your answer to this question is going to be. But what was the hardest part about that transition?
It was 100% the people side of it. I mean,
yeah.
I looked at it. We had been head down, building a business, offering value to people, growing team members, amazing relationship bonding for years. And it all becomes in jeopardy with something that you maybe never saw coming, was not in your control. Interest rates or market or oil, things changed and it impacted you extremely severely, and not knowing where you're going anymore. I mean, you start questioning everything. One, you know that you can't afford to pay many people, so you have to lay off. And this is not just like a little layoffs. This is like 90% plus layoffs. So you ask yourself, did I even build anything worth? Did I even add value? Like, you start questioning everything. What was the purpose? Like, I've spent the last 10 years building business and almost having to restart. Maybe I shouldn't do this. Am I not good at it? A lot of personal reflection goes into this too. And sometimes I think I can see a lot of people not breaking out of that because it's such a negative thing to go through, painful thing to go through. And, you worry, or at least I did. I worried about all the people going, they're going to have jobs. Are they going to make their mortgage payments? How are they going to? And those were really, really hard conversations. Looking back, 2 more senior people came right up to me, shook my hand and said, "Thank you, brother. It's been a ride. It's the best opportunity I've ever had." And kind of stuck with me because I was like, well, those are outliers. Like, that's weird. The rest of us were all sobbing and in pain. And I got these couple guys and I'm like, well, what the? And they're just like, oh, this is the construction industry. We've been through this before. And yeah, brother, right. I love what you, and I didn't really let that sink in. It probably took me at least 3 years to truly forgive myself for what happened. But yeah, sorry.
No. Alex, I appreciate you sharing and the vulnerability, because I hope that the people that listen can understand that this doesn't just happen to them, because I would be shocked. I think everybody would be shocked to know the number of people that this happens to. And I've talked about it before on the podcast. I've talked about it elsewhere, that a big gap in understanding business ownership is that business owners have a connection to the people around them that isn't appreciated enough. And you build trust. And then when things like this happen, you feel like you breach that trust. Right. You
do. Thankfully, there's, you have an amazing support team, or you hope to have an amazing support team around you that keeps you alive and keeps you supported. And then as time goes on, you can start to understand why it happened. I think one of the biggest problems for me is not understanding the why. Because am I a failure? Were they a failure? Was the business model a failure? Did we not have, there's so many questions. And, but what I did recover from it. It was painful for sure, but unbelievable lessons come from it. And I remember someone telling me afterwards, people aren't going to judge you by that action. They're going to judge you about how you treated them for the years that you worked with them. And I felt really damn good about actually how we treated them. And I look at where lots of them are today, and where lots of them are, we still work now together, both in the same company and another company. It's amazing how many of the same people I work with, but at the time, complete uncertainty. And yeah, it was, I get very emotional over both the staff and the commitment to it, and also our customers and the value that we offer, because I know how valuable it is to offer what we're doing to our customers. And then I also go, not only am I impacting our staff and their families, but if we can't offer value to our customers, then they're impacted too. Those are the two things that really drive me. And so I've learned a lot of those lessons, and I'd say I'm a little bit older and a little bit wiser. Again, I have no idea where that spectrum is, and I think we continue just to get older and we continue to get wiser. But I definitely use a lot of those lessons learned to protect the organization, to protect our team, and to protect our customers, ultimately, so that we can ensure values added for many years to come.
Yeah. I mean, they're hard lessons,
Yep.
right? And as you pointed out, when I said I think anybody could guess probably the top one or the top three items, and as soon as you said people, it was the people aspect. You know what? It's always the people aspect. That's always the best part, and it's always the hardest part. It just is. Yeah. I want to shift a little bit and just explore kind of as we close out here. Maybe the biggest project that you undertook, and more of the business side of that, like kind of your financing strategies and the partnerships that were required, and how you built kind of the team, the collective team, not just your team, but the collective team around building some of the biggest projects that you've undertaken.
Yeah, well, I'll give a specific example that kind of ties into, I think, our purpose about building communities at full throttle, and how it helped kind of kickstart Big Block to where it is, and it definitely ties in what you were saying. We had a really cool opportunity to work with Comfy, and we still work with them, but it's the Central Urban Métis Federation, Incorporated, Comfy, and their leader, Shirley Isbister, unbelievable, love her. And let's see if I can screw this quote up, but she says a quote that I love and admire. She's like, the speed of the leader determines the rate of the pack. Can I say that? The speed of the leader determines the rate of the pack. I did screw it up, but I think you get the comment, or you get the intent of it. Speed of leader determines the rate of the pack. No, that's it. And we had an opportunity to work. Their GM at the time, Kelly Pruden, he reached out, and it was in 2019. And he said, look, they're looking at building an elders lodge, a Métis specific elders lodge. And we had done lots of modular, a lot of affordable housing, and so it fit. But there was a lot of things we didn't know. And so he invited us to this integrated design charrette, where we got to learn from the elders, and this was before COVID. It was fascinating because, like a few months later, you look at COVID, be like, I would never be in a room with
right.
40 elders, right? But I remember it vividly. We broke into these groups, and the elders were talking about, how their generation works, and why they need to, more of a Métis specific and traditional, and so that we can raise our kids and have these opportunities for growth. And I remember they said, we've been talking about this for over 20 years, and I just hope it gets built before I die. And I thought to myself, I'm like, we've been in business for 10 years. We've built over 20
right.
projects. How could you not have this? If this is so valuable to you, your community, why don't you have this? Why don't you? And it's not for lack of will or determination. So I remember coming out of that meeting, talking to our staff, being like, we have a duty here. We need to add our value. And I remember it was a bit daunting because, okay, like, we're going to build a Métis project, an elders lodge. I'm like, there's more things that I don't know about that than I do know. But we were smart enough and aware enough to say, okay, if we don't know anything about certain pieces of this, then let's find the right experts to help guide us through. No different than they were relying on our expertise to guide them through a project. Because to me, it was easy to be able to work through a project. But my challenges were some of the funding pieces, which we then found partners to go through, 5 funders, 7 programs, extremely complicated, which I could talk a long time on a separate thing about why a lot of affordable housing doesn't get built. Because if it doesn't pencil and you have to bring in some supports, it only compounds the complexity of it. It is so complex. But But so that side of it, and then obviously the elder side of it, and understanding a lot of the the specific cultural elements I didn't know anything about. So you bring in architects who probably will have forgotten more than I'll ever learn, and that's not to be a negative, but just they're so ingrained in it, and so you capitalize on their abilities, you tie it in, and it was an unbelievable project. And I'll never forget the day we turned dirt. I got emotional. And it was because I could see the joy in Shirley's eyes as she spoke. And that's when it really helped solidify for us. It was about building communities at full throttle. A lot of people talk about them. A lot of people design or consult. But at the end of the day, we need to build. We actually have to take action. And communities can encompass a lot of things. But in that particular sense, helping our customers on something that they're amazing at community building. They're amazing community advocates. They have hundreds of rental units and they know how to take care of people and to build them up. They needed a development partner. And what's awesome about that particular partnership, and I call it a partnership, at the end of the day, they're their projects. We're just a fee for service. But I do call it a partnership because that's what I truly believe in. And it's that whole people side of it that, our culture is about partnerships. We've built 2 projects with them, and we actually just turned dirt on the 3rd project. And it's those relationships, those partnerships that can grow and expand over time. And I think that's really helped define who we are and helped us understand the pieces of the journey for our customers on where we can add value so we can make a difference.
I am so glad I asked that question, because that was that kind of put a bow on so many things that you were talking about, like the path of the organization, the North Star kind of changing as you evolved, as the company evolved, as the need of the community evolved. I have to get closure on one piece of that story. Why hadn't it been built for 20 years? Is it because of all the things that you outlined, all of those challenges that you saw yourself? Was that just daunting for anybody else to actually get the dirt turned? Yeah,
I think I probably wouldn't oversimplify it to just one specific item. I could, if I flip it and put it into your lens, why aren't more homes being built right now?
Sure.
And there's a whole off of it. What I can say is, I could talk for a long time on that side of it alone, but if there's a reason we're not building homes, and there's a lot of them, affordable housing is probably 10 times more complicated.
Right.
And so I would just say it wasn't for a lack of will or trying. I don't know about some of their previous, but I can tell you it's a very complicated beast, because it's probably 10 times harder than more market rate where it's one funder. So again, what I love about that is I'm just so grateful that we could help them. And now we're a strong advocate for that. But it is amazing. And I guess I won't get into it now, but it's amazing how many roadblocks are out there, and how you think, different groups and even government want these things built. But it's amazing how the roadblocks, the gatekeepers and I don't think they mean to be that, but it's so fragmented, it makes it impossible almost to get projects built.
Yeah. On the complexity side, I often say that anybody who starts a conversation about fixing the housing challenges in Canada, anybody that starts a conversation with all they need to do is, I'm out. Like that's not a conversation I'm going to participate in, because that there is no all they need to do, and that applies to so many things, like healthcare and the economy and so many things in the world today. Things. There's no fix.
Yeah,
right? There's no one fix.
What I do find interesting though is how many times we are not asking the right people and listening to the right people. And I look at this and we've spent 15 years, over 16 years now doing this. We have an unbelievable amount of experience across different projects that we would love to help showcase. And it's fascinating how we don't actually take those good examples. It's fascinating how we as society don't look at that and go, hey, why don't we just take what's been done successfully and repeat it. It's almost like we have to reinvent it every time. I think the answers actually are there if we had strong enough leadership to find it and to promote it and to unpack it and to empower it.
Yeah. Well, you and I, before we started the podcast, we said we're long overdue, 20 years overdue for a sit down lunch and to really just unpack some of this stuff. Let's plan to do that in 2025, and let's see if we can collectively make our mark on changing some of these things going forward, because as you pointed out, it's complex. It's not going to become any easier unless people start to look at what that North Star is, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and how do we bring the right people together to solve it. And I think you have a great contribution to that. So, Alex, truly, man, I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate all of the stories and certainly the many lessons that you were able to share. I think any listener, whether they're experienced in business, if they're experienced in business, they'll relate to a lot of the things. And if they're not, it'll help set them on the right path. So really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Trevor. I think it was an absolute blast and an honor. I appreciate all that you're doing. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, man.